The Synthesis Council had made their decision with the cold precision that defined their species. Batch 7429 was obsolete, flawed, destined for recycling. Reagan stood at the observation deck of the human research vessel Meridian, watching the Kelith transport ships gather in formation around the detention platform. Inside those sterile white corridors, 15,000 sentient beings awaited termination, their only crime being born with genetic markers the Council deemed inefficient. "They're really going through with it," Diego muttered beside her, his dark eyes reflecting the cold starlight. As the Meridian's chief xenobiologist, he'd spent 3 months studying the Kelith civilization. He'd never imagined he'd witness this. The Kelith were a species that had conquered biology itself. 2 millennia ago, they'd abandoned natural reproduction entirely, opting instead for genetic engineering and artificial gestation. Every Kelith was designed, perfected, optimized for their designated role in society: scientists, engineers, administrators, each one a masterpiece of deliberate creation, but perfection demanded culling the imperfect. Batch 7-429 exhibits heightened emotional responses. The Synthesis Council's official statement had read, decreased productivity, tendency toward creative ideation outside assigned parameters. These deviations compromise optimal societal function. Deletion scheduled for solar cycle 4892, day 47. Reagan had read that statement a dozen times, each reading stoking the fire in her chest. She was a diplomat, trained to respect alien cultures, to observe without judgment, but there were lines even diplomacy couldn't cross. Heightened emotional responses, she said quietly. They feel more deeply. Creative ideation, they imagine things, create art, question their world. She turned to Diego. They're not flawed. They're more human than the ones who designed them. Diego nodded slowly. The Kelith Council had permitted human observation as a courtesy. Humanity was new to this sector, barely worth noticing, except as a curiosity. A species that still reproduced naturally, that still suffered disease and genetic randomness, that still died of old age. Primitives, really, by Kelith standards. Which was precisely why the Council hadn't anticipated what happened next. Reagan's transmission to Earth was brief, requesting emergency authorization. Asylum Protocol 7. The response came back within hours. For words that changed everything. Protocol approved. Bring them home. The Synthesis Council magistrate materialized on the Meridian's main screen, her genetically perfect features arranged in confusion. Ambassador Reagan, your request is ... incomprehensible. You seek to claim the defective units. They're not units, Reagan said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. They're people, sentient beings, and we're offering them asylum. Asylum. The magistrate's head tilted precisely 15 degrees, the Kelith expression for puzzlement. From what? We are providing them a clean termination. No suffering. Their base materials will be repurposed for the next generation. It is efficient. Diego stepped forward. Magistrate, in human culture, we have a concept called inalienable rights. Every sentient being possesses inherent worth, regardless of their utility or genetic optimization. How quaint, the magistrate replied, and remarkably inefficient. These units were created for specific functions. They have failed those functions. Surely even your primitive society understands resource management. Reagan felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice diplomatic. We understand that consciousness itself grants value. Your batch 7-429 thinks, feels, dreams. They're not resources. They're people who deserve the chance to live. Live as what? The magistrate asked. They have no purpose. Then they'll find one, Reagan said. That's what freedom means. The negotiation took 6 days. The Synthesis Council found humanity's position baffling, even amusing but ultimately irrelevant. If these backward humans wanted to burden themselves with defective bioforms, so be it. The Council had newer, better batches in development anyway. The transfer was clinical. 15,000 Kelith, all between the ages of 15 and 30 in human years, boarded human transport ships. Most moved in silence, their enhanced minds struggling to process the concept of an uncertain future. Reagan walked through the Meridian's cargo bays, converted hastily into living quarters. She found a young Kelith female sitting alone, staring at her hands. I'm Reagan, she said gently. What's your name? The Kelith looked up with eyes too bright, too aware for someone deemed obsolete. We were not given names, only designation codes. I am 74298847. Reagan sat down beside her. Would you like a name? I do not understand the purpose of names when we have no purpose. Names aren't about purpose, Reagan explained. They're about identity, about being someone, not something. She paused. When I look at you, I don't see a defective unit. I see someone who feels things deeply, who might create beautiful things, who might discover something wonderful about the universe. The Keleth Council called those traits flaws. Humans call them gifts. The young Keleth's eyes widened in expression. The Council would have classified as dangerously inefficient emotional display. Gifts. Gifts, Reagan confirmed. You were designed to be perfect machines. Instead, you became people. That's not a flaw. That's evolution. Diego found Reagan on the observation deck 3 weeks later as they approached the human colony of New Terra. Below, 15,000 former defective units were learning what it meant to choose their own paths. Some were studying art, others, philosophy. Many were simply learning to laugh without purpose, to create without function, to exist without justification. The Council sent a message, Diego said. They've begun auditing their entire production line. Apparently, our inefficient sentimentality has created what they call a troubling precedent. Reagan smiled. Good, let them be troubled. They don't understand us, Diego observed. To them we're illogical, wasteful. We save those who serve no function. They're wrong about that, Reagan said. Watching a group of young Keleth playing some improvised game in the recreation bay below, everyone serves a function. Sometimes that function is simply to remind the universe that life isn't about optimization, it's about living. One of the young Keleth waved up at her, 74298847, who now called herself Aria, after the musical form she'd discovered and fallen in love with. Aria, who wrote poetry that made even hardened Marines weep. Aria, who the Synthesis Council had deemed worthless. Diego followed her gaze. You think we made the right choice? Reagan thought about humanity, messy, inefficient, beautifully chaotic humanity. A species that had clawed its way to the stars not through genetic perfection but through stubborn, irrational hope. A species that saw people where others saw obsolete machinery. I think, she said finally, that the Keleth engineered themselves into perfection and lost something essential along the way. They forgot that the greatest achievements don't come from flawless design. They come from imperfect beings who refuse to accept the limitations others place on them. Below, Aria was teaching another former defective unit to paint. Their movements were unpracticed, inefficient, absolutely beautiful. We didn't save them, Reagan said quietly. They saved themselves the moment they chose to feel instead of function. We just gave them the space to survive that choice. And in the cold mathematics of the universe, in the vast equations of cosmic indifference, that small act of humanity rippled outward, a reminder that consciousness, in all its flawed and feeling glory, was never obsolete. It was the whole point.